Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's really a pleasure to see so many of you. And it's one of those rare occasions that we have to interact on Zoom in a off-the-cuff manner with the membership, get some feedback, but also answer your questions. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Penneau. I'm the deputy leader. I'm currently in Montreal, otherwise known as Chochaki, on the unceded territory of the Ghanaian Kayaka nation. And I'm very excited to have our colleague leader, Elizabeth May, who's calling from, from Dubai. So I don't know if you want to say just a few words briefly, Elizabeth.
Yeah, it's just so great to see everybody piling on in here. As you can see, I'm in a very nondescript hotel room where I got to Dubai November 30th, which was the day the conference opened. Technically, although it's Saturday night where you are, it's Sunday morning here in Dubai. And we are at a midpoint, and I'm sure a lot of you will want to know how the negotiations are going. We'll dive into that later. But I'm always, as ever, buoyed by seeing fellow Green parliamentarians from around the world. So that's the next meeting I run to after seeing and being with all of you for an hour is the annual mid-COP meeting called Green Family Breakfast, where there'll be members of parliament and some of them in cabinets and some of them the negotiators for their country meeting on the other side of, I don't know, you can't call this place town. Well, at some point we'll find out how many of you have ever been to Dubai and we can yeah. Anyway, never mind. Back to Jonathan, because I want to hear from Jonathan because we haven't seen his face. We haven't talked to each other for so long. Please tell me what it was like, because I was here waking up to the amazing news, which I kind of knew in my bones while I was the last few days canvassing for Ashland. In my head, I could hear this word that I didn't want to say out loud because it feels too scary to say it out loud. But the word I kept in my head was landslide. I'm hearing landslide. I'm hearing landslide. So please tell me, Jonathan, what was it like to be in the headquarters of the Kitchener Center Greens?
Well, it was incredible. I have to say, so I'm seeing at least one person who was there. Matt Van Cleef is here. I'm not able to go through all the panels right now and see everyone else, but I'm sure other people were also present at this incredible election night in Kitchener Center. Uh, Quite frankly, it felt almost like a miracle. However, a miracle that didn't happen overnight. It was very much the product of hard labor by an incredible team of volunteers. They mobilized roughly 400 people who came in and day out, including when it started to get cold and dark in November, knocking on doors, preparing food, having fun together. All thanks to an incredible campaign team, but also a great candidate, Ashlyn Clancy, who won by a landslide. And I have to say, I mean, Elizabeth of the two of us is always the more optimistic one. So
That's to put it mildly.
to put it mildly. So I knew it was going to be close.
How are these guys putting things on here?
So I knew it was going to be very close. And I thought it was a very good shot. Ashlyn had a very good shot at winning, but that it would be maybe by 1% or 2%. We all thought, it was going to be a victory by a few hundred votes, which really was part of the GOTV, the get out the vote strategy as well. We're calling people and telling them, please go out and vote because this is going to come down to a few votes. But in the end, it didn't come down to a few votes. It came down to 5,000 votes, which is just incredible. So a massive thumbs up to everyone here on this call who participated in this campaign, who was instrumental to this campaign, or who made calls from the rest of the country. I know people called in from across Canada and Ontario. So really an inspiring win that very much lifts the boats for all Greens and also brings us a number of critical lessons for us as Greens. One of them is, and we've known that for a long time. I mean, that's how Elizabeth got elected. That's how Mike got elected. That's how, of course, Paul Manley got elected. Jenica as well, back in those days. Start early. We start early, as early as possible. Knock on doors. build a strong volunteer base, a strong grassroots movement, get out there, talk to people, make sure that people also know that Greens are there to represent them and not some status quo, political parties that will end up having to regurgitate the talking points that come from the top down. And that's what Ashlyn and her team were able to accomplish. And looking forward for us as a federal party, less than 2 years away from a federal election, lots of big, good lessons to take stock of, and which means that as soon as the year starts, we really need to start getting into campaign mode and prepare for the next election. It's going to be a critical one. You all know how important it is that we elect more Greens, because quite frankly, the climate is not doing well. The political climate in Canada is also not doing very well. And so the more Greens we're able to send to Ottawa, the better, not just for us as a party, but of course for all Canadians. This is who we are. We're doing this for Canada. We're doing this for our children. We're doing this for the planet. And so an exciting win for Ashlyn and for the entire Green family. The Green Party of Ontario continues to impress us. We have a lot to learn as feds of how they work together. Elizabeth and I are working very hard on a constant basis with our governance structure and other actors within the GPC to ensure that we have the same synergy. And in that regard, and I'll stop here, please be aware that we have our general meeting coming up in February 2024. It was delayed, sadly, because of, sadly, but for good reasons, because of the by-election in Kitchener Centre, which was called after we had decided to initially have it in November, as we had to postpone it. It's now happening on the 24th and 25th of February. And it's a really, really important opportunity for members to participate, to give feedback, to vote on critical proposals, whether they are policy related or have to do with our internal governance. I really encourage you to take a look at the website where all of these proposals are listed. Marlene, I don't know if you can share that in the chat, but please make sure to reserve your date, the 24th, 25th of February. We need you. We need to maintain quorum as members passed the resolution at the last GM to ensure that the quorum be 200 people. So we'll have to maintain that number, and we're counting on all of you to help us do that. We're currently 242 people in this chat. So if every single one of you shows up at the GM, we're going to be in a good place to pass these critical resolutions. Now I'd love to turn it over to Elizabeth, and very soon, or if not now, we'll turn it over to you for your questions, if you have any.
Let me just do a rapid follow-up to say I see quite a few people on, but thanks for spotting Matt's. I mean, we've got, by the way, you're all looking at the screens. You've got the same screen, so we've got 10 full screens of people, and I'm trying to flip around and see people, but really I saw Peter Varty there. I last saw him canvassing door to door at Team Clancy office in Kitchener Centre. It was a great lesson, and I like the lessons that you've pulled out of it so far, Jonathan, but I'd just stress that it was a lesson in when the party pulls together, when we're really unified, and there was no greater sign of unity from the party than when the request came from Mike Morris, emailed the whole council and said, look, when we picked the dates of what we thought was going to be at long last the virtual general meeting, they were nowhere near any important election. We had no idea. And suddenly the Kitchener Centre Greens were saying, the timing of that, of the general meeting will pull people away from working on Ashlyn's campaign. You can't be in two places at once, even virtually. So there was an official request to the National Council. And I just thought it was really excellent. It was completely unanimous to postpone the general meeting. And that kind of decision isn't taken easily, especially when we haven't had a meeting. We're over time to call one. It's a great message in unity. And obviously Mike Morris it proved out. I mean, when Mike first won, again, they said, oh, well, that's the punditry, who we always like to surprise. The punditry was, well, Mike Morris won because of circumstances that won't be repeated. Now people are talking about Kitchener Centre as a safe green seat. I think you've seen it in the emails we've sent out, but Ashland got more votes than the Conservative candidate, the Liberal candidate, and the New Democratic Party candidate combined. Like that's just beyond winning. That's crushing it. So there's that message that Mike Morris's work as an MP has so impressed his constituents. Because he walks down the street in Kitchener, people he doesn't know stop him to high five. Like they're like, wow, it's Mike Morris, because he's doing such great work. And the other thing that Mike Schreiner in Queen's Park is the most impressive opposition as just one person. Now I know what that's like to be a one-person leader of a party in a parliament where you're surrounded with other parties. It makes a huge difference. It'll make a huge difference for Mike, but for the Green Party of Ontario's effectiveness. But Canadians will also see, oh, this duo of Ashland Clancy MPP, Mike Schreiner MPP, Mike Morris MP, what starts happening? Well, a lot of you on this call, I see Sheila Levy, I see Dan Kells, the former CEO of my ride, and there's a lot of friends on this call from SGI. I see Tim Maloney, people, and just anyway, you know what it's like to have a Green MLA in Adam Olson, Saanich North in the Islands, and a Green MP, me. So this business of the opportunities that only Greens can do. If you're in another party, it would never work. Like if you have an NDP member of parliament and an NDP MLA, big whoop. They're not going to suddenly, no, sorry, but that's the reality. You're not going to suddenly say, what can we do here to cut through jurisdictional barriers? What can we do to make things better? Adam Olson initiated it. Adam Olson, Adam is, as some of you, I mean, I think you all know, he's Green Party MLA and former interim leader of the BC Greens. He's the first Indigenous person to be leader of any party in this country. But Adam invented this idea of a Saanich Gulf Islands roundtable, and we do them on the order of once a month. So that's the MLA, the MP, inviting local governments. We don't do a big media thing around it. We just get together and discuss what's happening, what legislative agenda items out of Ottawa create an opportunity that is going to be important for instance, the trustees at the Islands Trust that are going to, we've just passed some amendments through coming out of this. One of our big issues for those of you who aren't from the area of the Southern Gulf Islands and the Gulf Islands, there's been a federal piece of legislation sponsored by the Minister of Transportation that focuses primarily on railway safety and modernizing ports. And we've managed to shoehorn into that. And that's also thanks to amazing NGO work and citizen activist work in through the Gulf Islands to focus on an issue that anybody not living in the Gulf Islands I'd need to explain. And I'm going to shut up and go to questions. But the anchorages problem, which is just bedevils us, that these huge freighters get sent into the waters of the Salish Sea, drag anchor. Can you imagine? They put down their anchor into the ocean floor and then they sit there while they wait to go back to the port of Vancouver to pick up their export product. Being able to work on that at all these different levels and get some of my amendments passed. This is just really great combined community work. But when you've got a Green provincial rep, in BC's case, an MLA, in Ontario's case, an MPP, and you're able to work with your federal member of parliament and get through a lot of the sort of, when you have a town hall meeting, when Adam and I do a joint meeting, there's never a moment where one or the other of us says, oh, we can't answer that here because is not my problem. That's provincial jurisdiction. I say, no, over to you, Adam. We break things down and do things differently. So there's a question already posted. So since I'm on the verge of answering it, I'll throw it out there. What's the biggest difference between the NDP and us? We are not controlled top down. There's no backroom group of people. There's no leader with power over anybody, right? You actually, as an elected Green, your boss is your constituents. That's it. That's it. And the NDP, by the way, Erwin Dreesen, with the point about a bit more serious than liberals about climate change, I've yet to hear Jagmeet Singh say out loud or at all, we've got to stop the Trans Mountain Pipeline. He'll never say it because it would upset Rachel Notley. You'll never hear Jagmeet Singh say we've got to ban fracking and stop pretending that LNG is a climate solution. He'll never say it because it would upset David Eby or John Horgan or one. So that the party structure of top down means that you can't count on any elected member of other parties. Same for the Liberals, same for the NDP, same for the Conservatives. It's very sad because I see a lot of good people who do a lot of things that they didn't sign up for because they didn't know they needed to change to check their ethics at the door, check their brains at the door because they're really in the way if you're going to just do what you're told to do. Anyway, so I'm gonna pause, and Jonathan, back over to you. And if we've got some great people on this call, we've got another 40 minutes at least, and I want to make sure that the questions that we're hearing, whether we're going to pick them up out of the chat as I just did, or this is not a meeting where things are controlled. Big surprise. It's a great party meeting. So if you've got a question at some point, you can take yourself off mute. You can open up your camera. You can wave at us. And if you've got a question that you want to pose live, I think it's time to go to live from Dubai. It's Saturday night and it's wide open to you. Jonathan's watching. Allison has played a big role in helping us keep things rolling as a grassroots green. There's a hand that just went up. Jonathan, why don't I ask you to have a look because you look at the whole screen, and I think the first hand up was Milo Clark, but I could be wrong. Did you see anybody else out there who's got a question, Marlene?
So
Hands will pop up in order. So whoever is in the top left corner is who's next in the queue.
So we're seeing also questions in the chat. One of them, the first one, sorry, Milo. So before you raise your hand, one question for you, Elizabeth. So how vigorously is the nuclear industry lobbying at COP, and is nuclear energy being accepted as a climate solution?
The nuclear industry is, and I'm sure you've seen the stories about the number of fossil fuel lobbyists present at COP. The nuclear industry also all over the place. Met with some folks. It was just at an event hosted by the Canadian government and the United Arab Emirates. Basically, this COP, this is a longer discussion of the historic shift in what COPs are like and what COPs do. They should be about negotiating agreements and tracking agreements that have already been negotiated. That's why this is important, because it's the first global stocktake year. But increasingly, and I think the shift for me happened in Glasgow with Boris Johnson being kind of a circus showman type sideshow barker. You can totally see Boris Johnson in that role. That COP was the first time, COP26 was the first time that I saw a UN Conference of Parties converted into trade show / spectacle. That's what this is like. It's and very distressing. So, okay, there are a lot of people shilling for things, and the nuclear industry is here big time. Scott Moe, as Premier of Saskatchewan, was here to say, look, we got the uranium. We're ready to roll. So yes, nuclear is pushing hard, but I met with a group of colleagues, MPs from around the world, who work on renewable energy. And they're saying, that the nuclear industry is counting it as a big victory. They got 22 countries to sign up to the idea, and France is in the lead on this, that we should, and Canada, triple nuclear energy by 2030. Meanwhile, there's 125 countries that are signing up to triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency. So the pushback on nuclear is strong, but the push for it is well funded. So we're like, in terms of the pushback being strong, I can tell you that the draft text at this point, fingers crossed, doesn't include the words nuclear. The draft text includes the words shut down fossil fuels, but that's draft. Nothing's agreed to yet. We're at midpoint, but I'm embarrassed about how much of the Canadian delegation is people from the nuclear industry and how much of the Canadian delegation is people from the fossil fuel industry. So an historic moment at COP, because the Climate Action Network folks, the international group of climate activists, it's the first time they've I'm sure you're all familiar with the notion of a Fossil of the Day award for the party at the convention, at the conference that's done the worst. And really interesting. It was Fossil of the Day for the first time ever was a province, a subnational government. So Alberta got Fossil of the Day. And the Canadian Climate Action Network people told me they'd had a real struggle to convince international delegates. But Alberta's performance was so bad, it spoke for itself. So Alberta, Fossil of the Day. Aussi, je veux mentionner parce qu'il y a les gens j'ai vu la Jancy, bonjour, et c'est pour quelqu'un qui veut parler français aussi. Nous ne sommes pas maintenant absolument bilingues. We don't have translation. But if you want to put a question in French, absolument bienvenue à nos collègues et amis québécois et québécoises.
Absolument. So I'm seeing quite a few questions in the chat, and then a few people with their hands raised as well. So Elizabeth will try, especially if the questions are on CUB. I just want as many people as possible to ask you questions since you're on the ground. Milo, was that a question about CUB specifically?
I mean, sort of, but I've heard a lot of people, especially the German Greens, saying that nuclear energy is unreliable and a bad idea. But so is it renewable or not? Is it environmental or not? I don't know.
It's not. I could make that the
Why?
short answer, but I could also say the German Greens that I've seen here, and also German MPs from other parties, they have to confirm this. Everyone here's they've taken nuclear energy totally out of their grid. They are no longer generating a single watt of electricity from nuclear. They've shut it down. And what surprised them on the ground was that when that happened, the price of electricity fell substantially. That wasn't so much of a surprise. But what surprised them too was a big bump in how much renewable energy was entering the grid. And something I hadn't really given adequate attention to was the nuclear being there was holding back renewables. Nuclear takes up space in the grid. And as one German MP put it to me, you can't crank it up or crank it down, deciding on a day-to-day basis how much nuke energy you want. So once they shut them down altogether, there was more space for existing wind turbines that they had in Germany to produce a lot more wind energy and put it right in the grid. The bizarre thing about the Canadian conversation, and there's some wonderful, wonderful hardworking Greens, particularly in New Brunswick, who keep debunking nukes, and the notion of so-called small modular reactors is basically fantasy. It's yet another sales pitch from the same old nuclear power pushers in Canada, and there aren't any. Bears repeating and underlining, there aren't any operating commercial small modular reactors anywhere on Earth. And the ones that are being developed will produce, if they do produce, the most expensive electricity on the planet. They make Site C look cheap, and that's saying something.
But what makes them not renewable?
Well, because they're not renewable, because, they are. Number one, uranium is a finite material. It is dangerous to mine. It is traditionally there's an environmental racism issue because it does a lot of damage, often on indigenous territories to indigenous peoples. There's nothing about it that's renewable. It creates permanent, long-term, high-level nuclear waste for which we still don't have solutions. By the way, I don't think the nuclear industry ever wanted to put high-level nuclear waste in an irretrievable place because they've always had in mind finding ways to pull plutonium out of that waste. The so-called, it's currently approved in New Brunswick, but the technology has never been built anywhere. A reactor, a salt reactor in New Brunswick being built by a company. Well, it's being built by SNC-Lavalin, but the front name is Moltex, a company from the UK. But the idea there is pulling plutonium out of the spent fuel from Point Lepreau. So there's also a nuclear proliferation risk, because any plutonium economy creates the risk of more nuclear weapons or of nuclear generated terrorism. There's nothing the least bit renewable about. And Rosemary, to your point, they're pulling fossil fuels out of the German grid as well. Germany has had a real crunch because it had been buying natural gas from Russia. So Germany's in a very difficult position. They did take a short-term bump in some coal, but they're still on track to shut down all of their coal, and soon, because they're bumping up renewables fast.
Thanks for that, Elizabeth. We're going to try to get to some questions about COP in particular. I see one of the comments, what's been happening in Dubai? That's what I signed up for. Elizabeth, tell us some stories. So how about if I give you a 2-minute warning, tell us the 2-minute stories, and then a story that you want us to hear, something that's going on, 2-minute story, and then we'll get to some questions from the chat and from the hands up.
2 minutes probably too long, because it's either.
Okay, 1 minute. You've got 1 minute.
Right now, the state of play right now is the outing of OPEC. And by the way, I posted there. I've had a couple of articles posted online. You can find them from Policy Magazine, or they'll eventually, or pretty soon, be posted on my MP website, which is elizabethmaymp.ca. The OPEC email that was found and leaked earlier today, Dubai time, or yesterday Dubai, is from the director of the OPEC countries, saying to all of their members, don't let any language about phasing out fossil fuels get in the final text. And a lot of the people's reaction to this, Jennifer Morgan, who's the senior negotiator for Germany, saying, look, this and the Union of Concerned Scientists saying the same thing. This sounds like desperation. That this could, people are actually feeling optimistic, which that doesn't come through locally, but optimistic that this could be the COP that actually says we have to get rid of fossil fuels. And so the reaction from OPEC is being seen as a whiff of desperation from the oil producing nations. So we can also see Daniel Smith in the same light, a whiff of desperation. If this is a turning point where we're actually able to see in the final text that we have to phase out fossil fuels if we're going to hang on to a survivable climate, hang on to human civilization, well, that's my first point, because that's what's going on right this minute, is nations like the Minister of Environment for Spain called the OPEC position disgusting. That's not typical UN language, and there's been a very strong pushback on what it is that the oil producing nations are desperate to do. Why there are so many fossil fuel lobbyists here is to try to leave space for increase, as Canada's, I mean, this is the famous, you've been looking for it, the emissions cap. So here it is, the cap, it's the emissions cap. But when they announce the emissions cap, it allows for an increase of production, an increase in fossil fuels in Canada. So that's something that OPEC wants as well. How do we increase producing oil and gas and selling it everywhere while claiming that we're being consistent with Paris? Canada is on that pathway. OPEC wants to keep that pathway open, and the majority of countries here are trying to shut it down.
Thanks for that, Elizabeth.
I see Lori. Thank you, Lori McMillan, who's back to doing communications with us. Lori McMillan from Nanaimo Ladysmith, who did comms for all of Paul Manley's work. So she's on this group. She's working with us back in Green Party Communications again. So fast on the draw. She's posted my first report in Policy Magazine, and I have a new one up that went up posted about 10 minutes before this webinar started.
Great. I'm going to go to a hand up for Ryder. Let's hear it. What do you got?
Hi, Elizabeth. I just want to ask if you could give a couple examples of how fossil fuel lobbyists are influencing negotiations, or just for people who, yeah, like me, who don't have a clear idea of what interactions they have with other people at the conference, what those are like, and also if you have any ideas about how to counter that influence.
Well, their presence here, of course, is overwhelming. And I mean, the negotiators, let me clear, there's two kinds of negotiators. There's the civil service negotiators from every country, people often in the foreign service who sit in the windowless rooms and go over lines of text, one line at a time. And then there's the political operatives. So you've got the members of cabinets from around the world, like Stephen Guilbeault, who's here, Francois-Philippe Champagne. And then the operatives, when you've got fossil fuel lobbyists and nuclear lobbyists being part of the delegations, which these guys are in Canada, they have access to the ministers, and they don't spend their time trying to influence the civil service people. They're trying to influence politicians. And the best line out of this COP, Al Gore said, because one of the have your cake and eat it too strategies for the fossil fuel industry is to say we can keep increasing how many fossil fuels we produce and drill and put in barrels, et cetera, because we have carbon capture and storage. And this is the magical way at which we get carbon dioxide and stop it from going in the air and store it elsewhere. It's never, again, like small modular reactors, another trumped up solution that doesn't have any evidence behind it. What Al Gore said was that the fossil fuel industry has shown much more success in capturing politicians than it has in capturing emissions. So it's the same as with lobbyists in Ottawa. The way they influence what is, lavish cocktail parties, offering all kinds of, well, you know how lobbyists work. I mean, deals and being chummy and reminding people that, when you get back home, I'm not in those conversations, but I can see that, the presence of fossil fuel lobbyists, and there are something like 5,000 fossil fuel lobbyists at this COP. There've always been a few, obviously. But where they really do their work is back at capitals. I mean, they capture the politicians way before they get here. And so the pressure, the citizen pressure, I was the first MP to sign on anywhere in the world. Carolyn Lucas and I were the first two MPs, Carolyn Lucas being former leader of the Greens of England and Wales, to the pressure for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And that's now growing and growing and growing. And a positive shout out for the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. Right now, Quebec, as a subnational government, is co-chairing the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is just fantastic. So the citizen movements around the world are making an impact, but we're fighting against an entrenched and enormously wealthy status quo industry.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll go to a question from the chat. Ann McAllister asks, how vigorously is the nuclear industry being lobbied at COP, and is nuclear energy being accepted as a climate solution? I think we've got the answer to the second part. I'm going to add to it I'm really curious about, the 125 plus lobbyists that are there from Alberta. How is that affecting what's going on there?
Well, as I said, they won Fossil of the Day. They've been holding events. Saskatchewan got itself its own pavilion to hold events and to have, and a pavilion is basically, it's a grand word for basically a space that has that can host events. So you can have a panel on how great what Saskatchewan's doing on climate is, and a panel on how great what Alberta is doing on climate is. So they get noticed, but they're hardly dominating the scene here. I think it'll be very interesting when the usual analysis of what is it costing the people of Saskatchewan to have advertisements in the Dubai airport as people arrive, telling people how great Saskatchewan is. I'm sorry, I mean, and I've got a lot of Saskatchewan friends on this call, so sorry, Tim Maloney, but there's a lot of Saskatchewan propaganda here, which is quite surprising. But it does get noticed, but it gets seen for what it is, which is self-interested promotion of industries that we don't want, fossil fuels and nuclear. But again, Alberta and Danielle Smith and all of the people who came with her are present. They're not coming to, let's say, where do I not see them? I do not see them in the morning briefings of the Canadian delegation with the folks from Canadian civil society that actually want successful negotiations. I have not seen Danielle Smith here. I have seen Scott Moe. Ran into Christy Clark, by the way, not sure what she was doing here. Former Premier of BC, for those of you who aren't from BC, but I think you'd remember the name. There's always a mix of people at a COP. Most people at COPs want it to succeed and push us to ever better, higher levels of ambition. But I don't forget that Bjorn Lomborg was operating in Copenhagen at COP 15 in 2009 and influenced the Danish government to have a train wreck in the negotiations. There's folks that want us to succeed, and there's very powerful folks who are well-funded who want us to fail. And it's strange because I don't know what planet they think they're going to go to where they'll have a survivable world while we don't. We really are all in the same boat. But yeah. Anyway, the question of enforcement just came up in a question from Sandra, so I will throw that in there. The biggest difference between the Montreal Protocol from 1987 that literally worked and saved the ozone layer, and any subsequent climate agreement starting even 10 years later, 1997 in Kyoto. Montreal Protocol was the last agreement we were allowed to have that had enforcement mechanisms that worked. So the Montreal Protocol that saved the ozone layer as an enforcement mechanism had trade sanctions. And that's something I don't give up on, that we have to regain the ability of the climate negotiations, since we can't renegotiate Paris without too many years lost with the carbon budget where we are and the immediate urgency to reduce emissions fast. One thing we could do is rally around to make sure that the trade deals and the people that are the appeal mechanisms to trade deals get clear instructions that the Paris Agreement is more important than the trade deals, and that therefore no complaint that's generated by an argument that there's been an unfair trade advantage to a country that's actually doing something to protect the climate. We need to make sure that the climate protective mechanisms are protected from the trade uber alles crowd.
Thanks, Elizabeth. At long last, let's go to Jency with the hand up.
Je vais te poser une question en français.
Bien sûr.
Oui, écoute, j'aimerais savoir ton opinion par rapport au dépôt par Stephen Guilbeault d'une résolution pour le Canada à l'effet que les compagnies de pétrole devraient produire moins dans le fond, moins de produits de combustion, qu'on appelle en français.
Ouais.
D'ici seulement 2026, ça veut dire d'ici 2 ans. Donc, la résolution qui a amené à Dubaï, est-ce que tu crois que c'est justifié qu'on attende 2 ans avant que ça fasse effet, même ici au Canada, mais un peu ailleurs dans le fond, parce que les émanations de gaz, du pétrole, c'est dans les airs. Est-ce que ça vaut la peine d'attendre 2 ans?
Okay, d'accord. Jonathan, I'm going to answer this in French, and then I'd like you to do a quick resume in English for everybody online. Mais Jancy, tu as raison. Selon GIEC, c'est clair qu'on doit réduire immédiatement les niveaux de gaz à effet de serre de façon comme ça, ouais. Et le vie de GIEC, c'est le 4 avril 2022, que c'est absolument obligatoire d'avoir une réduction grave avant 2025. Et
Wow.
alors, nous avons le promis un cadre, pas les réglementations, c'est un cadre pour une discussion, une consultation sur la question d'avoir un cap sur émission et va pour le début en 2026. Et c'est évidemment, c'est trop tard.
Merci.
Jonathan, you want to do the English follow-up?
Well, I'm writing it in the chat, so it's going to be for everyone
Oh.
to see.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. I thought, gee,
Merci.
Jonathan. Anyway, the cap is
Elizabeth?
a lower target than we expected and starting later than is acceptable.
We have 15 minutes left. Can you believe that? So let's try and blow through as many questions now as we can, as quick as we can. And I see your hand up, but we've got a couple questions from the chat. I'm going to go to the chat for a question and then come back to you. Catherine Doucette says, realizing issues at COP and the changes since Glasgow, as mentioned by Elizabeth, is there a viable international alternative to COP?
No. If there were, I mean, I'd be real tempted to find it and go with it. I mean, it's and there's and again, we could ask the same question in a different crisis, and I want to change the tone because it's more grief-stricken and horrible as we sit here to what's been happening in Gaza. Is there an alternative to the United Nations, right? And no, I mean, if we didn't have, I mean, and again, the COP is the United Nations. The Conference of the Parties are the Conference of the Parties to what? To the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to which every country on Earth is a party, which means we've both signed and ratified. It has a level of gravitas way above a campaign commitment by a different party. The Antonio Guterres reaching out this week for Article 99, which has not been ever reached for by any Secretary General, to go directly to the Security Council and say we need action now, and for the U.S. to kibosh the efforts for a ceasefire being imposed by the United Nations. So it's in a lot of different contexts, whether COP or war, one can say, what good is the UN? And I just, if we didn't have the COPs, where could we go to invent what replaces them? Same thing if we didn't have the United Nations in the context of peacekeeping and humanitarian aid. Where on earth, what would we do? Where would we go? So a more robust, effective United Nations, yes. Enforcement mechanisms in our climate agreements, yes. But if we didn't have this format and this process, I don't know what would replace it.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to go to Anne Rainey.
Hello. Thank you, Elizabeth. Everyone, you've heard about the Greenbelt Grab in Ontario, and I'm sorry to take us off subject, but I'm wondering if there's any help at all federally we can get. We have a jewel of the Greenbelt here in King, Mary Lake, Sir Henry Pellet's country estate, that's Casa Loma. And the moraine is the most important part, really, of the Greenbelt, along with it has also prime farmland. The people out in BC may not realize how important it is, but the fresh water in Lake Ontario that helps make it drinkable comes from the moraine north of the Lake Ontario. And that moraine is a result of glacier stopping and melting at this point. So it's a very huge feature, and we have to protect that. And what we have is a wetland and a kettle lake, and the developers you read in the media are the ones that want to build all over it. Our municipality has let us down. Something funky happened there. And the province isn't any help, but it is an area of natural significant interest, an ANSI, and it has 7 species on the federal at-risk list. Is there any way that could help us, Elizabeth?
I wish I could. Let's say there's a very effective mechanism the federal government could use to help protect the Greenbelt, but it's not the Species at Risk Act, because the Species at Risk Act is too weak to actually work to protect species. That's just a short answer quickly, Anne, because I want to go to the thing that could work. I see Christine Elwell here also from as Toronto Green. Back in the day when before I was in the Green Party and in Sierra Club and working with Christine on something called the Great Lakes Water Quality Annex, and we have an agreement around Great Lakes that prohibits the interbasin transfer of water. And one of the more important analyses of what Doug Ford proposed to do in pushing housing into the Greenbelt was it would violate that agreement, the water annex, the Great Lakes annex, because it would inevitably, by having housing developments here, and here, in terms of wastewater, you'd be doing transfers. Now, the Great Lakes annex is a legally binding agreement between Canada and the United States, plus 2 Canadian provinces, plus 8 US Great Lakes states. And the provisions have teeth. So I had gone to Stephen Guilbeault on the floor of the House and handed him this months ago and said, because he started talking about how he could use the Species at Risk Act. Yeah, maybe. I'm not convinced, as I said, but you could really use this and you could move fast. And we will continue to push as Greens, and as you know, and just spreading the word. We should be talking it up and saying, look, at this point, Ontario is out of compliance just in terms of its information and reporting requirements to its fellow parties to this agreement, being the 8 Great Lakes states that are up to date on their information reporting and so on. But Ontario is negligent, and I think we should be driving down on that hard to continue to protect the Greenbelt.
This is in the Toronto water main or watershed area where I know that York Region, we cover Lake Simcoe and Ontario, Lake Ontario, and they're very strict on keeping the water that came from the same watershed going back. So that I don't think will help us at Mary Lake, but I thank you very much. It's pretty important, and I also just wanted to say thanks for being there. I don't know how Courtney Howard's doing, but I've seen her there, and I wanted to point out to everyone that I'm feeling a bump on the Greens here in the rural area because of the Palestine-Israel policy they came to know so well, and it really helped to hear the UN call for sanctions on boycott on occupied territory product. So I'm proud of our Greens for sticking to telling the truth and sticking to our policy. So
just to say, Anne, if the Great Lakes deals that we already have don't protect Mary Lake, let's continue this conversation back when COP is over and figure out what we can do as federal Greens to back up Mike Schreiner, make sure that we protect the Greenbelt. We do know it's important from outside. I mean, British Columbians, a lot of us, well, obviously, and it's national leader for the Green Party of Canada. If I'm not paying attention to the Greenbelt, I'm not doing my work. So let's just keep working together on that.
Thank you.
And by the way, Courtney Howard's doing awesome here. This is the first COP, just to share that if people missed it, where health is a key issue on the agenda. We had a couple of days dedicated to discussions. So there were World Health Organization and a lot of Canadian Medical Association folks, and Courtney Howard playing a big role there. Also ran into William Gagnon, who many of you will know, who was also from Northwest Territories. There's been a lot of engagement on health and climate, and Courtney's really playing quite a leadership role there.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I've got one hand up in the room, and I've got a question from the chat that I really want to ask. And we are down to 7 minutes, and there's some other business we'd like to take care of before the top of the hour. So let's do, I'm going to go to Catherine, and then I've got a really nice wrap-up question from the chat that I'll ask you. So I'll go to Catherine, We'll go 1 minute, Catherine, with Elizabeth, and then I'll ask the question from the chat.
Hard to find that mute button, sorry. There's kind of been an idea kicking around for a while, and I was wondering if internationally people are thinking about this as an important component to climate solutions and addressing the increasing extremism and radicalization that happens in our society a bit. And the idea is getting rid of the paywall for scientific research. Every person should be able to see everything in all the journal articles and go to first sources. We shouldn't be expecting people to believe we're evidence-based if we won't let them see the evidence.
Yeah.
And so is that like, we might open up copyright law soon for other purposes. So maybe we could do something about that. Maybe we could have a community license. So you know how Microsoft has different levels of licenses, so they can still charge businesses money, but they can give you a cheap license. So I don't know, maybe. I was just wondering if anyone thinks that's important.
Well, I think I'm really appreciate you raising it. It is important. One of the things that we have is through our shadow cabinet and Green Party been taking positions on it is related, is that the whole business of information and education, and how C18 and the pushback from Google and Facebook, et cetera, taking information off of places that people could find it. For instance, during the forest fires, and Canadians couldn't get access to the information of whether they were under evacuation order or not. We've put out a very strong position in favor of CBC being fully funded for its news divisions, so there'd be non-commercial, no advertising, and able to open its own sort of community bulletin boards for posting things so people could read them. To take the paywalls off all scientific articles makes total sense. In that same vein of, we want public information accessible to the public as easily as possible without it being a profit center for transnational digital outfits like a Google or a Facebook or whatever, or even for the medical journals to have the right to keep that or medical journals, scientific journals, to keep that out of public domain. We need information to be accessible to people, because a lot of disinformation, as we know, is pumped out and accessible. One of the coolest things I learned while here, and obviously people from Quebec may know this, but the Quebec Assemblée nationale passed a law that all members of the Assembly, so the Quebec MNAs, the equivalent of British Columbia MLAs, all are required, obligatory requirement, to get climate education, to go through a training to know a lot about climate science that they didn't know when they were elected. I really want to pursue this for the federal parliament. I think it makes, access to science. It's yes, people should be able to get it past without a paywall. But how is it that all this time, I know for a fact that Trudeau's cabinet has never had a science briefing on what a carbon budget is and why it matters, that net zero by 2050 is kind of is irrelevant if you don't get to 60% cuts by 2030. These things, basic information, should be accessible as much as possible. So thank you for raising it, Catherine. And I know I threw another couple of thoughts in there, but it's critical that all Canadians, and especially those that are making the decisions, are properly informed on the science.
And the first sources are important too, because people aren't checking the first sources. Purdue gets away with stuff because people don't check first sources, and I'd like to check what my doctor says, not just assume that she's saying the right thing or assume Mayo Clinic. But anyway,
well, speaking of doctors and pharmaceuticals, the go-to place that I trust is called Therapeutics Initiative. It's out of UBC, and it takes the same data package that Health Canada gets and analyzes the drug packages of Big Pharma, and will actually say and advise governments, don't buy this one. It will kill more people than it helps. So we've always, as the Green Party, in advocating for pharmacare, we've also advocated for a source of information on pharmaceuticals not contaminated by the way in which, there's 3 drug company salesmen for every doctor in Canada. And a lot of doctors in Canada take free trips offered by pharmaceutical companies. So there's a real heavy degree, which I think you're on to, Catherine, of corruption and influence around what was exposed around Purdue, but we're still dealing with the opioid crisis and the damage done by OxyContin and the way in which it was pushed into our population.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Catherine, for your question. I am going to go to Kevin Dunbar. Kevin, put your hand up so you pop up for us. Kevin Dunbar is our executive director here at the Green Party of Canada. And so I thought we'd be remiss. He's here with us tonight. Here he is. This is our executive director. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin, good to see you. Kevin, do we need money donated right now? Just thinking that might be something you wanted to say.
Well, and that was why I thought I would pop up first to say 270 people have joined us tonight, which is exceptional. So I just want to say a huge thank you to our members, supporters for coming out on a Saturday night for our Saturday Night Live from Dubai. And thanks, Elizabeth, for waking up to join us for this. And for those of you who do or don't know, December for the Green Party is one of our biggest fundraising months of the year. So we raise about 25% of our annual income in the month of December alone. We've set a bold goal this year of raising $600,000 in December. This is to get us ready for an election that is likely to be in 2025, could be called anytime, but we want to be ready and to start to do the groundwork now that gets candidates and gets us ready to get more Greens elected. And we saw that with Mike Morris, we saw it with Elizabeth, we saw it really, really recently with Ashton Clancy. It's the work that you do early, getting out knocking doors early, getting a candidate early and getting set up that really gets that Green momentum going. So we put a link in the chat. If you can donate, would really encourage you. Any amount really, really helps us to reach our target of 600,000. And also just thank you all for being here tonight and just wanted to pop up to say hi. And with the Green Party, the one thing that I'll always say is that we are frugal. Your money goes further. Your dollar goes further here at the Green Party. And if anyone has watched Elizabeth travel between Ottawa, Kitchener, and Dubai, and New York, you would see the most frugal MP travel and the most emissions-friendly MP travel out there. And while we've got Pierre Poilievre making headlines, spending more money than the Prime Minister, well, that's not the Green way. So thank you all for being here tonight, and thanks Elizabeth, JP, and Marlene.
I just want to do a thank you to Kevin. I mean, everybody on this call, except, we've got a lot of you are not only donating money to the party, you're donating your time on various committees and locally in your own EDAs, and just so much effort is there. And we have a member of our federal council on, Carrie Rutherford, who's the rep for Alberta. Sorry about none of anything I said about Danielle Smith is Carrie's fault. Let's just say that right up front. But we're also really, really blessed right now to have a really great executive director. Kevin comes to us with a lot of experience from children's organizations, global humanitarian work, and he currently still is on the board of the Jane Goodall Institute as a volunteer there. And we're a very small team. We have a very small staff, and I'm a volunteer too. A lot of us work really, really hard to build the party, but nobody's working harder than Kevin, and I'm really, really grateful. So I don't get a chance to say that in front of a lot of members very often. And in the meantime, just to say that I will keep updating you on what's happening at COP. The negotiations are supposed to end by Tuesday. They usually run late. We will see, but the key document that I'm watching, which will be there are a lot of different decision documents. There's a lot of announcements happening, but we are at a point where this could be seen as the historic turning point. I like to think about when we look back once we've solved the climate crisis and the books and the history of this is written, and it says, oh yeah, the people who are the heroes of this story were these climate activists and the Greens all around the world. This could be a moment when you were looking back and saying, okay, so we averted going to 3 or 4 degrees Celsius globally. And the moment where the fossil fuel industry realized their day was done was ironically in an oil producing country called Dubai. Or other United Arab Emirates in a city of Dubai. We could pull that off. So again, the more resources that we have to do our work as Greens, these things are really connected. More elected Greens will help move Canada forward. Nothing else will. And for that, yes, we need to be preparing. We need to be preparing right now to have strong candidates in the ridings that we know we can win, which right now, with the win in Ontario at Kitchener Centre, means we also can be looking at pairing an MPP with a federal MP in Guelph. That's just one example. Guelph, Kitchener Centre, there's a second riding near Guelph. There's a lot of ridings on Vancouver Island. I don't want to go through the whole list, but you know where they are, and we're going to win them. But that starts with having a robust financial situation, which we still don't have. We're stable, but we're not robust. So I would really do want to see that fundraising target for December reached. It actually does matter. I know I've gone 4 minutes into over the hour, and I'm the one who has to go to another meeting pretty soon. I'll stop there, Marlene. Were there any other questions, Jonathan?
I just wanted to and this can be a little short thing. It was just a really great question in the chat, and I thought it would be really great wrap. In your opinion, can you tell us one hopeful thing that has happened at COP?
Many hopeful things. I think I heard Mia Mottley, I don't know if anybody knows the name right off the bat, Mia Mottley. She's the Prime Minister of Barbados. She emerged as the most important voice from the Global South at COP26 in Glasgow. And I went to a session with Mia Mottley and Sir Nicholas Stern, obviously very UK, and he's the former chief economist at the World Bank. The two of them were talking about, with a degree of certainty, that this is the way the world was going, redesigning the global financial architecture around basically on a scale of what happened after the Second World War with Bretton Woods. So talking about, to do this, yes, we've had a lot of announcements for the loss and damage fund, and that's all good stuff, but it's not sustainable. You get 2 major storms would wipe out all the money, $700 million announced at this COP for the loss and damage fund. And 3 years ago, the loss and damage fund odds were still on it would never exist because the US didn't like the idea. But that money doesn't last. That, as I said, a couple major extreme weather events and all that money is gone. What Mia Mottley and Nick Stern were talking about was a global governance of global revenue sources, and I mean, this is, Pierre Poilievre's not going to be on board with this. We need a global tax on currency transactions, what used to be called the Tobin tax. And we need a global tax on travel. And Mia Mottley was saying, well, maybe it's, if you're taking a domestic flight, it's $5 more on your ticket. If you're taking an international flight, it's $10 more on your ticket. But that all goes to a global fund. Or also international shipping right now still falls outside of Paris. The notion, I mean, I get very excited about big ideas that change things really. So yes, shutting down all fossil fuels. Yes, transitioning the economy as quickly as possible to renewable energy, making it fair and just, and having just transition for workers, all those pieces that are being negotiated all over the place here. But for me, the most exciting thing was to hear Mia Mottley and Nick Stern talking about a different architecture and how the multilateral development banks, how the World Bank would administer funds. And the World Bank, who trusts them to administer anything, or the International Monetary Fund, but reimagining global institutions as they did at the end of the Second World War. Big picture stuff to make it work, that society is more equitable. Within Canada, obviously, wealth taxes and taxes on excess profits, so we can actually eliminate poverty. there's no excuse for the growing gap between the richest and the poorest in our own country. And this is happening rapidly. But again, Marlene, the question got me all excited, but that was for me, the most hopeful thing is to imagine that it's now being discussed between nations and by people who have clout in the world financial system, that we find a way to create reliable sources of revenue globally that are governed through global, fair, and transparent mechanisms to ensure that we are not leaving the poorest of the poor in our dust while we continue to have an obscenely wealthy 1% in a world of deep injustice.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm glad we got you all excited at 6 a.m. to start your day in Dubai. I'm going to throw to Jonathan. Do you have some wrap-up words you'd like to say?
Just a big thank you to all of you for joining us this Saturday Night Live from Dubai, and wishing you all well. Thank you, Laurie, for your work. Thank you, Marlene, for organizing this. Elizabeth, good to see you. Kevin as well. It will be we'll have another one of those, I'm sure, very soon in the new year. Take good care.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank
we
you
gotta
for having us.
Keep the chat open a bit.
Such a pleasure. Yeah, I can
Thank
I
you,
can
everyone.
keep the chat open for a bit, but I'm not going to stay too long.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. It's just been, and I'm shout out to Sheila for bringing my dog. It was so nice to see Zoe for a minute.
We are happy to see you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
International
Thanks,
Forum.
Elizabeth. Thanks.
Thank
Our
you.
Thank you.
leader in the
Merci et
International Forum.
dankjewel to Matt.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Hey, Lisa, love
Bye,
you.
Jonathan.
So good
Hey.
to see you. We got to get, that's somebody we're going to get
Thanks so
elected
much.
right there. If you guys don't know her in the Hollywood Squares, Dr. Lisa Gunderson, deputy leader of the BC Green Party. Woohoo. Love you guys. See you back home.
Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth,
Bye.
from
Bye-bye.
Kamloops.
Thanks,
Thank
Renee.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
A bientôt.
Ah, bien.